From takedowns to chokeholds, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is a martial art practice that comprises over 1,000 technique moves to push one's opponent into a state of submission. In Rolling, A Lady's Guide to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, author Melanie Farmer captures readers as she explains this physical art form and braids it with the evolution of her relationship with her mother and a hilarious introspection of her life. The newest release from Burrow Press explores the dichotomy of gender as it relates to a male-dominated space. We sit down with Melanie to talk about her chapbook, the choice of creating a nonfiction collection in the second person, and how this collection of essays found its way into the hands of Colson Whitehead. Stay with us for another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. Are you currently looking for a bookstore that has a great selection of books? Well, Kizzy's Books and More is that bookstore. Visit www.kizzy'sbooksandmore.com to purchase your next book for our book club. Use coupon code VulgarGenius to receive 10% off the subtotal of your first order. Welcome back to another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. We are your hosts.
My name is Denny.
And I am Veronica. And we are so delighted to have this wonderful author that is making their debut into the literary world and to our hearts. We have none other than Melanie Farmer. Melanie is a Central Florida writer and educator who holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Central Florida. She is the winner of a 2019 Intro Journals Award in creative nonfiction from the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. And she is the first winner of the Hurston Wright Foundation's Crossover Award in Literary Nonfiction. Her chapbook, Rolling, A Lady's Guide to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, is published by Burrow Press, and more of her work can be found in the Tampa Review and Split Lip magazine. Her book, Rolling, is also our pick for the month of August. Welcome to the show, Melanie. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I'm gonna pass it off to Denny, and
we just have a couple of get to know questions for the listeners at home. Since this is a book about jiu-jitsu, what food would you say is like jiu-jitsu? Very random.
Oh wow, that's not the question I thought we'd start with. What food?
That you would liken to like practicing jiu-jitsu?
I don't know, like a cinnamon roll. Cinnamon roll's very delicious, but like complicated, hard to make, lots of layers. Yes.
Cinnamon roll.
And it's a roll.
I've been thinking about that. And that too.
What is the most favorite thing that you have baked?
My favorite thing that I've baked. I really like making apple galettes, and I really like all apple-based foods, like olive oil cake with apples. Really delicious.
That sounds so fancy. What is the most unexpected thing that you have done as of late?
I've had a very laid back summer. I didn't do anything, and I just was trying to be okay with that. And that for me was weirdly an exception to the rule of not overpacking my summer with things to do. So it's in doing nothing, that was I didn't expect to do nothing with a couple of weeks off.
Look at that. That's right up anyone's alley who works at school and that summer vacay comes around. You definitely want to utilize that break, right? That's a good way to do it.
So what do you do for fun?
Well, jiu-jitsu, obviously. What do I do for fun? I bake. You asked me about baking. I bake a lot, and I also cook other non-sweet foods. I don't know, just book stuff and hanging out with people and exploring Orlando, and that's the vibe.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our getting to know you section. But what we wanted you to do is to read an excerpt from your book, so that everybody can get a little taste of what it is that you have in this wonderful little package here.
All right. So the book is in segments or little sections. I'm going to read from a section called Companionship, but there are several other sections that precede this one. So here are your instructions. All right. Companionship. While you do not go to the gym to meet men, there will be men there. Simply because they are your teammates, they will take on a too close familiarity to you, like a gaggle of older or younger brothers that you've never had. They will not interest you as dating prospects at all. Your mother may experience a heightened sense of concern and urgency when it becomes clear that your interest in jiu-jitsu is not a passing phase. She may fear that the sport has the ability to permanently erode your femininity, thus decreasing your desirability in the dating sphere. Her desire to prevent permanent damage to you may result in increased interference in this area of your life. When you're not at the gym, your mother will stress the importance of wearing skirts and makeup, going so far as to buy these items for you to assure that you have enough in supply to properly assert your beauty. This is a concern of hers that is heightened by your perennial disarray and your male-skewed group of friends, and your complete lack of dating interest in the lot of them. While she cannot control your actions, she peppers your suggestions with how to make yourself more appealing. She encourages you to develop a passing interest in a real, mainstream American sport like football, despite your expressed distaste for it. Everyone likes football, she says. I don't. You just need to try harder. Do you want me to explain it to you? Nope. Everybody needs to know a little bit, at least so that they can talk about football. Not everyone likes football. They do. You don't. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for reading that excerpt. That's one of our favorite parts of your book. You have written such a wonderful thing here. But upon our research of you, we found that you have a collection of essays called Be Your Own Charlatan that you submitted to be your thesis at UCF. And this collection was the house for your chapbook, Rolling. How did you decide that rolling would be your introduction to readers, and how can we get a copy of that thesis for ourselves?
The thesis. Oh, the thesis now is like in a deconstructed pile downstairs on my kitchen table while I'm trying to turn it into something more like a book. So you can get your hands on it when it becomes something else and maybe has a whole different title and different stuff in it. So it's funny, like how did I decide rolling should be the one that becomes the chapbook? That's not really how it happened. And in a sort of hilarious way, I never really intended to publish this essay. It was just like something I wrote because I was kind of playing around. And when the Hurston Wright Award came up, it is funded by ESPN. And so I was like, well, let me send them the sports essay because it's ESPN. And when I won that award, I had like this big like gulp moment where I was like, oh, wait, I didn't mean to want people to pay attention to this essay specifically. I just was like interested in the award, which had to do with going to there was like and it was 2020, so a lot of this stuff didn't happen, but there was an award ceremony where you get to like kind of hang out with like cool writer people and a workshop that you got a scholarship to. So I was trying to get into the workshop and I did, yay. But then all of a sudden there was all this focus on this essay that I never thought of as like one of my like things I felt like throwing out into the world, but it was out there. So Ryan Rivas from Burrow Press approached me about it after I had won the award and asked if he could have it. And so I was like, here. And then, you know, it became this chapbook. But yeah, and I've had like such a mixed feelings about it because I didn't ever think it would get published. And now it is published. And people are like, wow, this must be the thing you really wanted to say. And I'm like, it's a thing I wanted to say. And like, I don't know, it's like pulling at all of my different worlds because it's like writer world and then jiu-jitsu people world and then my mom and my family all kind of like converging at once. And I never really thought about the way that this essay would do that. It didn't occur to me till like after it was like out and people started asking me about it and like people who like don't do book stuff in my life started asking me about my writing. And so like there's a kind of a mixing of my worlds that I didn't intend to create, but I guess it's here now.
But I think that's what made it really good. My husband doesn't read for shit, but he does martial arts. So when he saw this book, he was like, "Oh, what is this about?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, do you know American Top Team? Oh yeah, I know about that. What are you doing? What are you reading about?" It's the first time in like fucking 3 years that this man has actually asked about what I'm doing. So thank you. But besides that, it's
You're welcome.
about connecting people together. Anyway, but yeah, it was so good. Like you did it so effortless. Like I don't know if you knew I did at that time, but it comes across to the page like, oh, it might have been like one of your, things that were on your head. Like you said, it's not everything that's on your head, but it was so effortlessly done.
Yeah, and I think that like it came about at a time when, I mean, you kind of see this in the first part of the chapbook where like I kind of talk about this like weird life transition of like I was changing like careers and I was changing cities and I was kind of thrust back into like really close proximity with my parents like as an adult for like the first time since college. And I think that for me, and like people who do jujitsu probably will like understand this, is that like there's something about like once you're like really deep into this practice, you start to like see everything through this lens of like, oh, it's just like this. Like it's just the same. Like the motions are the same. The struggle is the same. Sometimes you want to go to the gym, you feel awesome, and sometimes you hate it and you feel like you're terrible and you keep showing up. And like I was thinking a lot about like my relationship with my mom, which is like really like it's not harrowing by any stretch of the imagination, but there is like this kind of like fortitude that's required. And there are things that are just, you have to concede certain things, or you have to this idea of like the motion of like winning and losing at the same time, and like getting something you want but having to let go of that to like transition to something else. And so like I think the combination of like where I was just mentally, but also that I was starting to practice this sport that has that kind of rhythm to it, is part of why this essay like came to be. It was like me kind of working through what that really meant.
You mentioned earlier about how the book came about, and you stated that you were the recipient of the Hurston Wright Foundation crossover award that was sponsored by ESPN. And you were chosen by Colson Whitehead for this auspicious honor. What was that like to win this award, knowing that Colson Whitehead was the person that chose you out of however many submissions? It's like this one, this is the one.
Weird. Still kind of weird. Like someone the other day like brought up like his name is on the book. I was like, oh right, yeah, that's in there. I mentioned that like it was 2020 when I got the award, and so it was like a weird time in the world. And I was at the time I was teaching Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad in my 10th grade English class, which I was doing like entirely online. So I was in this mode where like I was seeing Colson Whitehead's name or somewhere, or the name Underground Railroad or whatever, like in subject line of email after email, and it was like everything was on the computer. And I remember like kind of like skimming through this email and then having a moment where I was like, wait, this is not like work email. I did my real email. This is like about a thing I sent out like months ago, to the point where I've almost forgotten. So that was like a strange, like cool coincidence to get that. But I don't know, obviously it's a huge honor because he's a badass writer and he read my stuff. Just the fact that he read my stuff, it's like if it crossed his desk would be cool. So it's like a double cool that he like read it, commented on it, and now it's a book. So.
Yes, that's hella cool. That's truly amazing.
Maybe you manifested it because you were teaching it, so you like called upon his spirit. Pick me.
Woke him out of his sleep.
Yeah, I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. Yeah, I must have been.
So we are definitely fans of short reads that are full of surprises. And this is definitely what you gave to us when we read your book. And the first book that we encountered that feeling was Disha Filial's The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. And you have taken us back to that moment with your work. And I was just curious. I know you spoke about it being something that Ryan Rivas from Burrow Press came to you and said, "Hey, let's see if we can put this together." So what was it that motivated you to say, yes, let's go ahead and do that, rather than you saying, wait, I kind of want to make it bigger? Why go small instead of going big?
Do you mean by going big, you mean like not putting it in a full collection?
Right.
I mean, I'm not sure that I won't do that one day. I think that it could fit in a collection. You know, since it's a chapbook, it's like this little like morsel. It's somewhere in between, which is kind of cool. Um, it also made me look at this piece really differently than I had. It's always been like, not, I shouldn't say always been, it's been like kind of an older piece, or at this point it feels pretty old. Like, I mean, it's maybe 5 years of like existing with like me tampering with it only here and there. And so I think that like it being like small and having it be illustrated and kind of like, I guess, arranged in a way that's kind of playful, was appealing to me. And I really love Burrow Press, just generally, just, you know, cool local press here in Orlando. And like, I love like their aesthetic. So if you subscribe to Burrow, you know that they're just super artful and like, so just the idea of having my work appear in that kind of like carefully made book kind of way, was big. Um, but I'm not sure that that this piece won't one day show up somewhere else. Possibly, I have, you mentioned my thesis. Like a lot of the stuff in my thesis is about kind of me exploring different ideas of like violence and like violence versus play and like where's that line. So one version of me kind of messing with that has been me trying to think about like what does that look like as a collection, and like I guess exploring for me what's like something that is both really off-putting and then also that I enter into with a lot of ease at the same time. There's some mention in the chapbook about you know, the idea that like if you're going to do a sport where like people literally like put their hand around your neck or like, you know, bend your elbow in a direction that's like not the way it goes, and they're gonna let go, like they promise. But the idea that you walk into this room with these people who some of them some of them you know really peripherally, some of them you will see once and maybe twice and never again. And you all, when you like walk on the mat, like come to this collective understanding that I'm gonna let you do this, is like sort of really absurd on some level. And I also think a lot about the fact that like I'm a very careful person. Like I'm very like cautious, and like I don't like to get into like I don't like roller coasters. I don't like jumping out of planes. I'm not really like a thrill seeking type personality. And so the fact that like these two things exist inside of me, I think are really strange. Um, and the fact that I do feel like not only safe, but like super happy in the context of this sport that, you know, is essentially built on the idea of, you know, either potentially causing harm or defending yourself from harm or whatever you want to think of it as. Um, so like, I don't know, I like this essay on that level because it lets me kind of get a peep into, if I were to explore this concept on like a bigger level, like what would that look like? And it's definitely helped me look at some of my other essays and figure out like how they plug together or don't, um to kind of serve that, to the exploration of that idea.
How did jiu-jitsu found you?
How did it find me? So like very literally, it found me because I was I was in Washington D.C. and I used to go to this yoga studio that was a two-story yoga studio, and on the top floor there was people were doing like various martial arts things. There was some capoeira going on up there, and nogi grappling and different stuff. And it literally was like me walking up a flight of stairs to be like, what goes on up here? Um, and yeah, so it's kind of like changed and expanded over the years, but like it started from that, just sort of having like proximity to something else that I was already doing. um and like, I don't know, it grew very like slowly for me out of uh more just like the idea of tinkering with something, like trying to figure something out. So I think that sometimes like there's a misconception that, you know, especially martial arts sports are like about aggression or like getting out some kind of like rage that's within. And actually, like I think of it much more like it's like this little like, what if I take this apart, kind of like itty bitty movements and like tiny like understanding of like the mechanics of the body. So like, you know, the connection between the yoga class downstairs and what was going on upstairs actually like was pretty clear. Um, and you know, the idea that so much of jiu-jitsu is not about attacking, it's about like adjusting or moving out of someone, moving into a certain spot, or you know, finding your way through without always having to like pummel your way through. Like you don't have to like I don't know, you don't have to be like a train, like just like taking everybody out in order to actually be pretty effective. um and that's an interesting idea in like a larger way to me, like the idea that like how do we make change without, you know, blowing up the world. Like how can you like, you know, maybe move a few things and then find a way in and then change the inside from the outside.
Yeah, my husband also said that to me. Jiu-jitsu is not about like going forward and just like because people see it as like that, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's like this very calculated move of like little bits and
Yeah.
how you can like adjust to it or how you make the other person adjust to you. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
You have this wonderful juxtaposition between the act of the fighting of in jiu-jitsu and then the back and forth mental matches with the daughter and the mother. Talk to us about deciding upon braiding these two parts together in that way.
I don't know. I think sometimes like the writing of it almost like happens by accident. Like as I was exploring the idea, like, oh, you know, you start to see the parallels between these two things, and you're like, oh, the, you know, the function is similar. I think that I think that for me, kind of what we're just talking about, like jujitsu is like not about like imposing force or like making someone like do what you want them to do. A lot of times it's about you getting your way by maybe going a different path or going a certain path, having that path blocked off, and then changing your tactic and ending up in the same place. And that in a nutshell is kind of like how I navigate my mom, who is a lovely person but super not like me. The way that she goes about life is very not like me, and I know she knows that, but I don't think she knows how, like, you know, I think there's this push pull that like most people who've like had, you know, you know, who've been lucky enough to have their parent with them like throughout their like growing years, like there's this push pull of I really want you to like me and I want you to like be into what I'm into and I want you to care about what I care about. Can you do that, please? But at the same time, the other half of you that's like still a teenager is going, I don't care what you think. Get out of my way. I'm gonna do this. Don't try and stop me. But also still like me and love me and like and so like you're always kind of moving. But I feel like I'm oscillating between those two versions of myself. So it's like I don't like the same stuff you like, and I refuse to change my mind. So I'm going to do this other stuff, but I would also like you to approve of it the same way as all this other stuff that like you kind of want from me. So like, I think there's just this, like I said, like when you think about the movement in the sport, and I talk about this a little bit in the chapbook about, you know, the idea of not trying to assert force all the time. Is really like I think also kind of an act of love, like to not insist that everybody meet you where you are is like, you know, there's a certain amount of maturity to it. And I think that on some level the book is also about me maturing into like some weird pseudo past adulthood phase. Like it's not a teenager book, it's not a young adult book, it's a I'm an established adult book who's been not having to like be an established adult in your presence very much, you know. So when you live away from your parents versus you know 2 holidays a year is very different than like in this case, like I was kind of like in their house now, and that was really jarring for me. And I don't think I appreciated how jarring it was until I started writing about it. Like all the little things that didn't seem like they mattered that much, or they're just like the logistics of living in a house with other people, like had all this weight to them, or all this story that I had brought with me about, I don't want to be here, I shouldn't have to be here, or I'm here because I did X, Y, or Z 3 or 10 years ago. So yeah, and like I think that in a lot of ways also jiu-jitsu is about dealing with your circumstances, not necessarily what your dream of how something was going to happen is, but how it is when you get there.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, that's what the chapbook is also playing with.
When did you start writing this? Were you writing it in the moment while you were at home, or was this something that you put in your mind, you filed it away, and you say, okay, I'm going to come back to this when I'm at another point, when I'm ready to sit down and really get it out?
Interestingly, I think I wrote this kind of like while I was home, but maybe in smaller pieces. But it's pretty like contemporary to like the stuff that's in it. This is not like a backward looking essay at all. And part of what I think is interesting about that is that looking at it now, like I think of this as, in terms of like my progression as like a jiu-jitsu practitioner, I'm like, this is a white belt book. This is about like what jiu-jitsu meant to me when I was a beginner at jiu-jitsu, plus my mom. It's those two things. And one thing that was really challenging for me during like the editing process is that like I don't feel like I'm this person anymore. Like I'm not this person in terms of like a lot has happened since the moment, but also like as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, I'm not this person anymore. Like my understanding of things has adjusted a little bit. I've had different teammates, different instructors, different stuff has happened. And so like I look back at it and I go, oh gosh, is that what I was thinking? But it's interestingly useful, I think. It's almost like a little time capsule of like where I was in that moment. And I just, as a writer, I often surprise myself with, people talk about the idea that like you can't really make art well until you've like put some space and then you look back. But I find that I frequently write like a big heavy amount on something while it's happening, and then like take a break, and then I go back and organize it. And like that big dump is often like pretty charged and like maybe captures something that's useful. Like it's not to say that you don't edit it. Like it's not just like you can like vomit your journal out and have it be a great essay. But I'm often surprised by how very adjacent to the experience some of my writing is.
Can you describe the voice that you chose for this piece of work? Like, how did you find it, and what did you think it? Why did you think it was the most effective when presenting your piece? Because it was very interesting. Like we haven't read a lot of books in this voice, which we thoroughly enjoyed.
This voice, that's one of the most common comments I've gotten about this chapbook, which is, I guess on some of them, like, well, it's me. So it's like me elevated like out of myself. I think the one thing that's true in this and in some of my other work is that like the idea of the form, I think, helps me kind of like click into a particular way of talking for the duration of that particular piece. And so like once I turned this into an instruction manual, like before it was something else, like I forget what it was, but once it became the instruction manual, it became a lot clearer what it is I needed to address, sort of like what the segments needed to be. And in making it an instruction manual, it gave me permission to talk like an authority about two things I didn't understand. One of those things being jujitsu, which I was barely learning at the time, and the other thing being my mom. So two things I don't understand with the voice that I do, and then something I understand really intimately, which is like how I feel. And so having it be like in between those two things makes it so that you can kind of, I don't know, you can speculate, you can imply, you can do all kinds of things about stuff you don't know and you don't understand. And then you also get to, cross the bridge over to the stuff that you understand pretty intimately. And it does put, I think, maybe some protective barrier between that and like having to write that or having to share that. Like the things that some of the things that are like emotionally going on are actually like kind of like, I don't know, like a little bit heavy or a little bit like there's stuff you like take to therapy, not stuff I necessarily would consider like essay worthy. And like I often like when I teach writing, like I talk about the idea of like what's essay worthy. Like there are stories that happen to you, and then there's stories that like connect to something bigger. And like without, I think, the voice, I don't know if it connects as well. Like it's not enough for it to just be mother daughter or mother daughter jujitsu or jujitsu daughter. Like it can't just be like those elements. It has to have something else to pull it together. And I think the voice does that.
Yeah, I think you getting that question often because I think it's just the way that it is written and how so eloquently explain. And it does something to the mind because I remember when I've read it several times. And when I first read it, it wasn't towards till the end that I realized I'm like, wait a minute. This is not fiction. This is nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back and I'm going to read it again. And it is still just as surprising as it was the very first time, where you feel as if there are different things happening, right? So you know that it's nonfiction. So we know that it is your story, but it also feels as if you've allowed us to be in that story and for us to be that daughter. And the voices to me, and when I read it, you have the very beginning that explains like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about in jiu-jitsu, and that's somebody else's voice. Like that's not you, that's somebody else talking. And then we come into, and this is how it applies to my life, and that is when I hear, okay, this is her in this moment. And this, like the narrator of a television show, we were talking about that today. It's like, you have somebody that's coming in and saying, this is what's happening into your life, into this person's life, and we're going to allow you to look through it. And I think what you've done, with this second person point of view is just like amazing. Like it just feels something totally fresh. I've not ever read anything like this before.
I think that I like playing with form because it makes me feel like less indulgent. Like there's something about when you write nonfiction all the time, like writing down, like, here I go, I did this and I did that, burr, burr, burr. Like you start to feel like, yeah, who am I? Like, why does anybody care what happened to me? And like, and I think on some level, it's like an important question to ask yourself if you're going to write nonfiction, because like anybody can sit down and like crank out what happened to them today, and it's not always interesting. And I think that like you as a nonfiction writer, you owe a service to the world, like to something beyond you. Mm-hmm. And if you can get to it in whatever way, that's fine. But I think that like where nonfiction becomes, I guess, like uninteresting, or the stuff that goes into the scrap pile, is the stuff that's like just about you and what happened to you, and you haven't thought about what it means beyond that. Mm-hmm. Because like, an individual's experience is so tiny. Like I feel like my world is like super tiny, and like how many people are like exactly what I am, this like combo of this specific check boxes, and it's like not that many. And so the question is like, how does it reach out to the rest?
Yeah, I definitely agree, because this as I listen to you just say that and think about other books that we've read that was nonfiction, that's sharing, this is what has happened in my life, and it's still having that feeling as if you can relate to it. I think about like Kiese Layman, I think about Brian Broom, I think about Kimon Felix, who all have taken their ways of using braided narrative to tell a story inside of a story to reveal something much more deeper.
So when you wrote Physique and Femininity, you have presented expectations that women always have struggled. Beauty standards always felt like they're against women of color. Of all of that instances in your life, how did you pick these stories that you provided in the piece, and how essential was like your mother be like the kind of like the one moving piece moving with you as you kind of like complete this little, the chapbook that you're trying to finish?
Yeah, I think that like physicality and femininity in particular are also like those sections of the chapbook are, like I said, like this is a white belt chapbook. This is me just getting into this sport and being like, this is awesome. Let's learn how to do this. And walking into the gym and realizing that it's like most women aren't there at all. And the ones who are probably will be gone within a month, maybe a year. That, it still remains true, but there have been like some changes like within the sport, but it's like, I don't know, like I kind of was fascinated with this idea of like people always talk about like male and female spaces, like places where you're allowed to be certain ways. And like I've gone back and forth about whether or not like you feel like you're like an interloper or you're an insider, or you're like there are these moments where like people forget you're there. It's almost like you disappeared. Um but also that like I personally have always felt really weird about like all female spaces. There's like, the gym that's like only women, or the class that's like only women. I'm like, I don't know that I particularly enjoy that either. I've always felt very weird about it. Like, oh, okay, here I am. Like, I'm supposed to feel different now because of this circumstance being like, we're all women and now I feel different. I've been like, I don't feel it. Like, what is it? What's the hype? And so like, I think that when I realized that, I was probably pretty young, and I've always just been like, I'm gonna go wherever I want to go based on whether or not whatever's going on there is interesting. And so this was a case where it's like I was really interested in this sport. I was like, it's like strange and complicated, and it's gonna take some time. And that just meant like being willing to walk into spaces and just be like, hi, I'm here now. Like, are you willing to deal with me? Because I'm gonna keep coming back. Mm. And so like, I think also the idea of, one of the questions that people ask all the time about jujitsu, if you're a female jujitsu practitioner, is that like, did you come here to learn self-defense? It's like a baseline assumption that like, that's the reason that you're here. And like, there's probably maybe two reasons that I do jujitsu, one of which has to do with like, I think of it as like a big puzzle, or like a language that I want to learn. I also think about it like as an educator, that I teach English, I write, I do these things all the time. I like doing these things, and I'm pretty good at these things, which means that like you're sort of disconnected from what it means to be like bad at something and still keep coming back. Mm-hmm. And so what you do as a teacher is you ask people to continue to be bad at something and come back. And so often you're in your groove and you're not having a hard time with this, while telling someone, just persevere, it's going to be fine, come back tomorrow. And so like, one thing I realized when I started training was that like, if you're not feeling that feeling, you forget how frustrating it is, and how it can really just almost like physically weigh on you. And so like that's why I do jujitsu. I don't really think about it in terms of like self-defense, or like what am I going to do on the street and stuff like that. And like people talk about that and it comes up, but like I think that's one of the things, again, it's a distinctly like female assumption, which is that like, hey, when all these people are going to assault you, didn't you come here to learn how to not be assaulted? Isn't it fun to be female? Like, you can't even like, have a hobby without it being somehow linked to your body being in danger. Cool. So yeah, like I think that there's, and maybe there's another essay in there somewhere, I don't know. So yeah, like I think that for me, like I'm just like a person who's like sort of bored with like a lot of the conversation about like what it means to be like, like attractive or feminine, or like whether it's whatever it is. Like I'm just like, snooze, I don't care. Like I don't want to get into this. And like for much of my life, I've tried to just like barrel through. Like I'm gonna pick what I like and go toward that thing. Without regard for like whether that means it's going to cancel out some other kind of option for me. So I think that that's kind of what those sections are about. And then like kind of a climactic-ish area of the chapbook is like, like I train at a gym that's like mostly guys, and then I go to competition and it's a female bracket, and it's the first time that like ever I've gone to compete with people who know what they're doing, are super competitive, and they're women. And like, like to be destroyed by like these women who are all like, we're all like some version of the same person. We're sprinkled all across the place, hanging out with like people who weigh a lot more than us, learning how to do this thing that's like requires a significant amount of strength. And then you put us against each other. And you know, like it also makes you think about the way that like women are pitted against each other a lot in just life in the world. And I don't know, like I think that I'm always like oscillating between those different things when I'm writing. And like this piece also, I think that maybe for me, because it's a mother-daughter thing, like thinking about like, so what's the dream when you have a daughter? What's a daughter supposed to be like? What's the like baby book dream of the daughter? And then I guess like how do I plug into the reality of that? And if you're being like super generic about it, like not that great, like for me. So I think that even just like my interest in this particular sport almost like subverts that. And then on top of that, like other elements of my personality also do. And so I think especially like the conflict between me and my mother, like I think my mom is a very like she's able to like buy into, participate in, and enjoy that version of being feminine. And I never have been able to do that. And so this was just like, you know, the I don't know, like the ultimate fruition of all these things that kind of, you know, like I'm not gonna do this and I'm not gonna do that. And then now it's like, and now I'm doing this wrestling thing and it's so intense and like people are throwing, you know, like so yeah.
Has she read your book?
She has.
And what are her thoughts?
I don't know. I guess I should be more specific. She has read the book. We have not talked about the book. She just read it and knows its existence is a thing. I don't know, like I thought about like how I was gonna say this to her like a lot and then like never really got around to it. But I was just like, it's not really a book about you, it's about me. Like you're like part of it, you're like a satellite to the exploration of me. And I'm sorry that's how it comes out. But like I don't know. I think there's also, at least from crafting it, I know that there's at least an attempt to acknowledge that I don't disbelieve that she loves me just because I'm so different than she is. And I think that that's part of the through line of the chapbook and the realization. And I think the additional realization of it's not necessarily it's not the job of someone who loves you to understand every little intricacy of who you are necessarily. Even if you think that that's super important, or even if you think it's like, you know, I have 10 qualities and number one is the most important one, and you might not understand number one. But to kind of come to peace with that. So, you know, like whether or not that's what she took from it, I don't know. But I know what the intention behind it was. So maybe one day.
Another, I think one of the sections that you know I liked was the section of tapping out. And like in the beginning, I really don't know, like I'm like I was very drawn to that chapter. And it's like, you know, to me it was very relatable because it's like, why am I doing this? What was all of that for? Well, you know, like why am I fighting? Why am I like resisting everything in my life, you know? And then like the feeling of being desolate and almost lonely in this experience, like I'm the only one that really knew what happened or went down there when I fought all of these other people. And you know, it's like that recognition of limitation almost, and you know, the evaluation of life choices, like moving forward from that point. Can you speak more on that chapter, and why, you know, why was it like necessary to be like, okay, this is what happens after this big high, after coming into this like, you know, arena of like fighting?
I think it's interesting because this also goes back to this idea of like, why do you train? Some people train to compete. I didn't really know like straight out the bat whether that was like what I was into or not until I went to competition. And one thing I learned from competition is that like it somehow for me, it kind of killed some of the joy of it a little bit, to the point where like I felt like I didn't want to do it. And so this also, you know, kind of becomes one of these moments where it's like, I'm a person who likes to be like, I'm going to be here and I'm here 110%. But then to say to my jujitsu self, I'm going to be here, but I'm also not going to compete. And I'm not going to like spend my weekends doing this. Not because I don't want to be serious, but because I don't want to do this or have this feeling. And like the idea of tapping out, like, you know, it's, to exit a situation voluntarily, because you don't like it, or because the pressure is too much, or because that's the edge and you've decided that that's the edge. That's how far I go. And so, yeah, that section also, I think, is, I guess, like an exploration of like kind of what is the difference between being lonely and being alone. Because at that point in the chapbook, like the narrators moved out of the house with the parents, so there's no parents anymore, and now it's just like, okay, this is what I wanted, this is the independence I've been whining about trying to get, I got it, I'm in it. And then this sort of harrowing thing happens in private, and then the car ride is in private, and then the return home is in private, and it's like, here it is, you got it. So I think that, like, because the way it's set up, it spans kind of the early to middle part of this training experience. That's like a place to kind of acknowledge that, like, there is like a certain loneliness to it as well, even though it is something that you do with companions all around you, which is not different than life and life decisions and stuff that happens. And living in a house with a bunch of people versus one doesn't really change how you feel in terms of like feeling lonely or not lonely. So yeah, and also just about like the shock of like building up to like a big thing, and then that thing releases, and then you're like, so what is this now? And it's like this mini version of like where the book begins, which is, I moved to the city, I built this whole plan for this career, and this career is not going to happen. Like day one of the chapbook is like, this is not going to happen. And so then there's like this mini revisiting of that experience in the sort of climax of the piece.
When you are talking about this book with other people out in the world, and I know that you have some things coming up later on next month where you will really be talking to a nice crowd, hopefully, of people to talk about your book for your book launch. But from those who have read it, is there anything that is constant that you found while discussing this book with others?
I mean, the consistent comment is about the voice, and I guess like the humor, or the sort of the lens that kind of is laughing at situation, the world, and self in various ways. That's the most common comment that I've gotten about it. And then sometimes I just get like weird questions about jujitsu, or like how it works.
That's when you say, well, you can come on down.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I can get that recruitment fee, get that percentage off of my membership. Come on.
And I think because like the voice, like you said earlier, it's because I'm gonna be honest with you, I think I read it like the second time like as a sitcom. I'm like, oh, I'm like watching this in my head. And it's kind of like like you're walking down the street and like this is and then the story goes on. And I think that's why people like to see themselves in the stuff that they read. And I think that's what you've provided here in this chapbook. So it was such a pleasant thing to read. This was loaded, but also it was like fast paced. Like there was never a dull moment.
So as we come to the close, we have a question that we like to ask everyone that comes on our show. You have two options. We like to know either your top 5 favorite books of all time, or the top 5 books that you are currently excited about that you want people to know.
Okay, can I mush them together? I don't
Yeah.
love the all-time question because I never have a good answer because my moods change. Top 5. All right, here we go. Danielle Evans' short story collection, Before You Suffocate Your Own Full Self. That's like a maybe oozing into all-time list book. I really love Heavy. You mentioned Kiese Lemon earlier. Love that book. What else? I have to have 3 more. Oh, There by Tommy Orange.
Mm.
2 more books. What other books do I like really dig right now? Oh, this is hard. I knew you were gonna ask me something that involved listing things. I'll just I don't know if this is a favorite, but I know it's on my bedside table because I'm starting it tonight. This is a shout out to Hurston Wright as well. When They Tell You to Be Good, Prince Shakur, that's a good book club book if you're making book clubs. And then I don't know, what's my fifth? I can't think of a fifth thing. It's too hard.
You can do it. I believe in you.
What's like an essential? Oh, well, let's go all the way back. Invisible Man.
Okay.
That's an all-timer.
I think that's a good list. You give us a little of the past, you bringing us up to the present, to what's now. That's a solid list. And we all know that these lists can change. This is the list that she's given us today in this moment. And you might get off this Zoom call and be like, oh, damn, I had another one.
I'm sure.
I didn't say it.
And you walk through your hallway and I'm like, dang it. That was what I was thinking about.
In her sleep, she's waking up. But Melanie, thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to be able to see you soon in person at Stardust. That's coming up at the end of August. And for those who are listening, Melanie will be doing their book launch at Zeppelin Books. That will be August 12th. What time is that starting?
What's the time? Oh, it's 6. I'm glad I didn't say 7:30. Be there too late.
There we go.
We'll edit all that in post.
Yeah. 6 o'clock. That means y'all need to get there at a good 5 to secure your seat, get you a drink, and get your money right, because these books need to be bought. But Melanie, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
coming onto our show. It's been a process to get made, and we are so grateful to have had you here to talk about rolling. And also cannot forget
if you want to catch Melanie again
live
we are doing August 27th, the Midnight Marauder Story Hour with Danny Sarta, Stephen Archer, Vidhu Agrawal, and Melanie Farmer. That starts at
8 o'clock.
8
p.m. So on that note, we bid you adieu. You have a good rest of your night. Enjoy the rest of your summer vacay, because soon you'll be back in the schoolhouse.
Oh yeah, too soon. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I will see you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our show.
Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Vulgar Geniuses.
Our theme song that you're nodding your head along to was produced by Sean Kantrowitz. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Dammit. That's SeanDammit.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast. See you soon.
Deuces.